Thank you very much, Margherita, for your introduction. And my presentation will be just an overview, an attempt to link and to outline the role, the possible role that industrial relations can play for the value of work. And within this presentation, also to describe the action of ADAPT, the organization I am part of, within this interplay between industrial relations and the value of work. So no one has ever argued that labor problems in a market economy constituting the foundation raison d'etre of industrial relations in Bruce Kaufman's argument no longer exist. Even the 90s prospects of the end of paid work have gone no farther, although post-capitalism utopias are finding fertile ground in current crisis times. More concretely, the COVID-19 pandemic has done nothing but put the human dimension of labor and its related problems in the academic and public spotlight once again. Work and its value have been addressed from different perspectives. Some authors have cast light on systemically valuable, though economically undervalued, services workers, like cleaners, caregivers, warehouse workers, and delivery agents. Others have pointed to the increased workload and technological surveillance, as well as to the weakened relational dimension of the work performed by people compelled to work from home. More recently, labor shortages in traditionally precarious and low-paid occupational fields like retail and restaurants have been attributed to the re-evaluation of work-related goals and plans performed by individuals in Western countries after the outbreak of the pandemic. A large part of today's labor problems, which the COVID-19 has just contributed to exacerbating, can be reconducted to the creation, acknowledgement, and redistribution of the value at work. On closer inspection, it is exactly by fulfilling these goals that industrial relations, as both a problem-solving approach and a field of study, have traditionally found their ideological justification in market economies. The field of employment relations involves the study of employment, with a focus on how labor and management combine to create value and negotiate over its division, as well as how people experience the workplace. The value which industrial relations have allowed to create over time is not merely economic, in terms of both profits for employers and wages for employees. It is not even simply systemic for capitalist economies to survive and function thanks to the meeting between the supply and demand of goods and services. By connecting and representing people collectively, as well as by advancing rights and opportunities for workers' assemblies, discussions, and mutual aid activities in workplaces, trade unions have contributed to building and sustaining the social and relational value of work. By introducing clauses on issues such as workers' training, career path, and participation in decision-making processes, collective bargaining has supported the value of work as a source of personal and professional identity. Overall, by instilling elements of solidarity and collective governance in workplaces, industrial relations have helped humans enjoy concrete experiences of freedom and personal fulfillment, which is indeed impossible outside of and apart from communal life. Not to mention the contribution of trade unions and industrial relations to political participation and citizen engagement in democratic public processes, as well as to workers' entitlement of economic and social rights by virtue of their membership in the employment relationship. In other words, recalling John Budd's famous conceptualizations of work, industrial relations have served for a long time to release work from being just a curse, a necessary burden for human survival and maintenance, and a commodity, an abstract quantity of productive effort which can be bought and sold in the market. Though accepting capitalist social relations and leaving related structural inequalities unchanged, industrial relations, in their pluralist conceptualization, have contributed to partly giving back to work its human face. That is its value as a natural human instinct, spurring identity formation, personal fulfillment, and more broadly, human and environmental conservation and regeneration. In this regard, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Maria Montessori, the Italian physician and educator known worldwide for having revolutionized child development and education in the first half of the 20th century. I have run into her only recently, after the birth of my first child, while I was looking for useful educational hints and suggestions. During one of my random searches, I was particularly impressed by her views on work and human development. In her 1936 book, The Secret of Childhood, the author does more than assigning work a fundamental role for personal satisfaction, development, and fulfillment, and for the safeguard of our economies and societies. Conceiving it as an attitude connatural to individuals since childhood, Montessori places human work within a broader universal plan, according to which all living beings' activities would be oriented not simply to their own survival, but also to Earth's conservation and regeneration. Corals build islands and continents by reconstructing coasts broken up by the incessant action of the waves. Insects transmit plant pollen while retaining much of the plant life. The condor and the hyena purify the environment of unburied corpses. Other animals remove debris, others make honey and wax, others silk, and so on. The mission of life is so immense and essential that the earth is preserved thanks to life embracing the globe with a layer equivalent to the atmosphere. Animals produce more than what their needs require. Their activity always results in a surplus, which is immensely greater than the direct needs of conservation. Therefore, they are all workers of the universe and observers of universal laws. Man, worker par excellence, cannot escape from these laws. Montessori's insights into the meaning of work from an environmental perspective gain a new relevance in what is today acknowledged as the Anthropocene age. As we all know very well, though, the enforcement of the universal laws which Montessori talks about, and according to which Earth is preserved and regenerates itself, thanks to all living beings' activities, cannot be taken for granted. And nowadays, the sustainability of human work from an environmental perspective, an issue largely neglected in the past, is one of the most crucial test benches for industrial relations. Overall, in the light of current transformations, industrial relations are urgently prompted not to give up with their original task of humanizing work. After all, labor is only another name for a human activity which goes with life itself, which in its turn is not produced for sale, but for entirely different reasons, nor can that activity be detached from the rest of life, be stored or mobilized. For industrial relations today, this popular Polanyi's quote translates into a number of concrete goals. Among these, we can list, firstly, to acknowledge and strengthen the historically overlooked environmental value of paid work by orienting social partners to accompany and support greening and just transitions in workplaces against the threats that climate change is dramatically issuing to human work and life. We can all agree with the International Union slogan, "There are no jobs on a dead planet." Secondly, to offset the individualization trends in times of remote work, fragmented career paths, and rising periphery and multicultural workforce by enriching the social, relational, and identity dimensions of paid work, and therefore by boosting individual guidance and assistance, as well as collective regulation in terms of rights and opportunities for workers' participation in decision-making processes, mutual aid initiatives, skills development, and the smooth occupational transitions, both within and outside workplaces. This means deconstructing the liberal traditions trade-off between individual autonomy and communal solidarity, by unleashing the potential of the latter to nurture the capacity of every individual to experience self-realization, which is in many ways defined only relationship with others. Thirdly, to tackle the problems of low-paid work by finding new ways to assess the economic value of work, especially whereby, such as in creative and care industries, units of time and technical skills are not the main criteria for measuring work well done. Fourthly, to acknowledge, respect, and preserve reproductive and domestic work, which is not market-mediated and yet extremely and increasingly functional in the age of demographic change, to our economy and societies by striking really sustainable balances between work, both paid and unpaid, health and life. I am glad and honored on behalf of ADAPT Scientific Committee and governing bodies that the contributions which were already presented yesterday and will be presented and discussed today and tomorrow at ADAPT ILO International Conference address many of these ambitious objectives. Returning to my initial point, therefore, it cannot be said that industrial relations have lost their ideological foundation. The human essence of labor and the rejection of the neoclassical assumption of perfectly competitive and problem-free labor markets are largely unquestioned. Nor can one claim that the balancing approach underpinning pluralist industrial relations lacks its reasons in today's market economies. Competing interests and uneven power relations emerge even more clearly along current vertically disintegrated production processes, whereby organizational and geographical capital mobility serves efficiency goals, often to the detriment of workers' equity needs, which largely rely on context-specific normative obligations not free from loopholes. Not to mention today's pressing need to balance ethical and data protection concerns with cost-effectiveness rationales in the growing deployment of artificial intelligence systems in workplaces. To address such systemic nodes and imbalances, business remedies driven by the unitarist logics of corporate social responsibility or stakeholder capitalism, while helping raise companies' awareness of their social and environmental accountability, mostly fail to provide long-term commitments and global responses on their own. On the other hand, radical or critical approaches intended to redress workers' problems by building their collective power have been blamed for largely overlooking work dimensions going beyond the economic exchange relationship, as well as lacking sufficient realism to build concrete programs and solutions. But if alternative perspectives to pluralist industrial relations have proved not to be satisfying by themselves, we cannot neglect the serious legitimacy crisis affecting traditional industrial relations institutions and players, such as trade unions, collective bargaining, and labor law, and the emergence and spread of new ones, like worker centers, labor NGOs, corporate social responsibility, multilateral international institutions, and so on. From different sides, industrial relations are called to integrate their original concerns about competing and shared interests in direct employment relationships with a number of increasingly interconnected issues encompassing intersectional personal identities, investors and consumers as indirect employers and new influential actors, families, communities, and the environment as both impacting on and being impacted by work relations. The impression is that work is a too complex, multifaceted, and multi-stakeholder experience to limit industrial relations research and practice to direct and bilateral employer-employee relationships. In Duke's and Streck's words, being not only a commodity exchanged for wages, but a part of social life, human work cannot be fully subsumed under contract or competition law, since social life is also cooperative, not for sale, and dependent on social norms that provide essential pre-contractual conditions of contract. It is the whole past century's social contract which is questioned here, since by grounding its vision of work, as well as the provision of economic and social protections on rigid theoretical and institutional categories like legal subordination, bilateral employment relationships, male breadwinners, and so on, it has ended up struggling to provide proper solutions to the new problems of labor, which continuously overstep those constructs. In face of such challenges, ADAPT, founded in 2000 by Professor Marco Biagi with the aim of promoting studies and research in the fields of labor law and industrial relations, does not have decisive answers, but at best, just a humble idea to approach them. Firstly, by treasuring and further cultivating the empirical method of early 20th century American institutionalists, and therefore by carefully analyzing real-world actors and practices. The annual ADAPT report on the developments of collective bargaining in Italy, currently in its 8th edition, fits with this approach, along with the various researches and studies conducted yearly by ADAPT in partnership with public institutions, enterprises, social partners, and universities. Secondly, and partly connected with this, by acknowledging, embodying, and voicing as many intellectual approaches and sensitivities to daily reality of work as possible. ADAPT was indeed founded and still characterizes itself as an association intended to gather members from various bodies and organizations, like public institutions, trade unions, enterprises, and business associations, thus mirroring the tripartite composition of Dunlop's industrial relations system. This in an effort to provide a neutral and independent field for freely discussing and collectively building the future of work. Thirdly, by valuing and honoring what was traditionally considered as both the strength and weakness of industrial relations, which is the lack of a closed paradigm and yet the integration of multiple disciplines. ADAPT team gathers postgraduate and doctoral students, research apprentices, and postdoc and senior researchers with backgrounds in labor law, philosophy, sociology, communication, and political sciences. Thirdly, by taking up Huzzard and Björkman's suggestion to engage with more interventionist approaches to industrial relations research, ADAPT International School of Higher Education in Labor Law and Industrial Relations promotes higher education and doctoral path in concrete work environments, such as HR, IR departments in private companies, employers and trade union organizations, private employment agencies, research and education institutes, and so on, where students co-create the research agenda on relevant labor topics and have the opportunity to act as change agents in industrial relations dynamics. Fifthly, by adopting and enhancing an international perspective to the study of work in a globalized world. This explains ADAPT participation in several European Union co-funded projects and cross-country initiatives, some of these conducted in the past with many of your universities and research centers, and hopefully in the future, also with those of you who have joined our international conference for the first time this year. The adoption of an international perspective, moreover, underlies ADAPT promotion of the e-journal of international and comparative labor studies and the international research community Cielo Laboral, as well as the organization of annual international conferences on crucial labor topics like the one which is taking place now. Fitting into and further promoting this broader approach to labor challenges, this 11th edition of ADAPT International Conference is intended to stimulate and share among academics, experts, and practitioners from different backgrounds scientific contributions on how to rethink work and its value. In the conviction that if industrial relations still serve a purpose in today's changing society, this must be the promotion of a balanced, inclusive, and sustainable approach to social development, which cannot but embed work, consuming so much of our daylight hours, conferring income and status, and shaping life chances in so many ways. So I wish all of you a happy ADAPT ILO International Conference, and thank you very much for being here.